Friends of mine as well as my colleagues. I work with a mobile advertising agency known as Sponge, and I come from a background of marketing and advertising. I also represent the Mobile Marketing Association of East Africa, who we launched last year. Now, the team here asked me to speak to you guys a bit about digital marketing. And one of the things that I was really happy to see today was that there's quite a number of companies represented here that do digital marketing. So obviously I'm going to be speaking to people who are very knowledgeable about the subject I'm talking about. One of the things I'd just like to point out is, unlike many of you, being a non-techie, my perspective of digital marketing is really from a consumer perspective in terms of what are the people we are selling to, going through, and how do we impact the lives of those people. And I think it's quite difficult to discuss digital marketing without really understanding how the consumers got to where they are. And to summarize it, I think it would be pretty easy to actually say that consumers have evolved from being communicated to in a few channels to basically choosing the channels that they actually consume. I'll give you an example. Those of us who were born in the 70s and those of us who were born in the 80s probably remember that we only had one TV channel and about four radio channels available to ourselves. Now, what did having 4 TV channels and 4 radio channels actually mean to our choices as human beings? It meant that the opinions we carried about life, politics, and many other aspects of our everyday existence were actually drawn from very limited sources. If you remember KBC, with due respect to them, then you may remember how much control they had of our thinking, of our thought processes, of our political opinions, and how little else we knew. What KBC said in the morning was always the gospel truth. It actually got to a point where we stopped believing them because we didn't have an alternative source of information. Now, fast track to the 80s and the 90s, and the average person has access to how many radio stations on the internet? How many radio stations can you actually access on the internet? Neto? Philip? Thousands. So suddenly, the people who used to sell Fanta, Lifebuoy, Blue Band, and all those products too, have taken control of communication. So we sitting on this side, trying to sell them stuff, are pushing stuff at people who, number one, draw their opinions from different places, and number two, can choose what to listen to and what not to listen to. So once that is clear and understood, then you get to realize that as a marketing person, your challenge becomes a very simple challenge. One, you have to understand how are these people communing amongst themselves? How do they communicate amongst themselves in the platforms that they're using? Remember one thing, for any community to exist, certain things must always be in place. And the first thing that has to be in place is that community must have a reason for being together. If you guys belong to a kiamba or a church, then you understand why you guys born in those particular communities, whether it's your church or your community. Now, the tough part for a lot of marketing people is that we try and force our brands and our products on people whose communities exist for other reasons. So for example, there's this group on Facebook that probably works for, or probably is together for purposes of Christianity. And because there are 1,000 people on that group, I as a marketer would see it as an opportunity to sell a lot of my products. Now, does it make sense for me to basically go and try and sell to them when in the first place, they don't sell to each other? And the challenge for a lot of us becomes finding a way of actually communicating with those communities in a way that does not intrude upon them. And in summary, what that means is understanding, number one, why are these people in their communities? And number two, what context or what reason keeps them together? And how can my brand add value to that particular context? and that particular group. And that may not be very easy, because the way we are basically programmed as, or the way we are wired as marketing people, to tell people about our products without necessarily understanding their perspective of it. Why? Because when I'm trying to sell you a horse, and in the market for a camel, I'll try and make that horse look like a camel or sound like a camel as much as I can. Now, to get into an argument with you about why it's a camel can become a bit of a difficulty. Now, marketers have to start accepting that when you go into the internet, or when you go online, if people are looking for a horse, or for a camel, then you've got to start thinking about where you're going to find camels. More often than not, we try and sell them the horse. So, as marketing people in a digital era, our role is more of not pushing stuff at people, but providing those people with a context for our businesses. And the difficulty about that is the fact that we're used to converting business language to consumer language. Now we are being asked to do the reverse. We're being asked to convert consumer language back into a factory rather than the other way around. And that has been a challenge that we have to actually address. And it calls for sincerity as businesses, and it calls for understanding and empathy with the consumers. I don't want to go into talking about the platforms we use, because I guess the people around this room can probably teach me a bit about that. But it's important to understand the context that we actually work in as far as mobile and digital marketing is concerned. Maybe to tap on mobile marketing a bit. One of the biggest challenges we face in this market and in many markets around the world is pushing SMSs and pushing content at people, at consumers. And increasingly, the best practice around the world is emerging to be one where you get your consumers to choose and pull your content, rather than force feed them with information that they do not need. At this point, I'll probably ask you guys for your questions or for your observations, and then I'll hand over to Monica.